How's it going? My name is Cameron, also known as Venus Theory, and in this video I'm here to show you around one of my favorite plugins, SynthMaster One. The thing I like most about SynthMaster One is how flexible it is. With the different modes of the sub-oscillators, the modulation matrix, and all of the internal effects, whether I'm doing sound design work or working on sounds for one of my own tracks, I know I can use SynthMaster One in any case and it can handle just about anything I can throw at it. So in this video, I'm here to walk you through SynthMaster One, show you some of my presets that are included with the new update, and give you guys some inside tips on creating your own sounds. So let's dive in and get started. Alright, so here we are in Cubase, and this is SynthMaster One. And the first thing I'd like to point out, if you'd like to change the skin to this one here, you can right click and change the global skin. I'm very partial to this white one. I like how clean it looks. So SynthMaster One is offered in VST and AU formats and comes with over 1,000 presets in the factory library. There is a ridiculous number of presets and they're all really usable. There's so much content here that allows you to just open it up, pick a preset, and get a track started. One of the things I like best about the factory library is that all the presets are actually pretty usable and act as a great starting point to just open up and then tweak from there to really get it to fit your track. So it makes SynthMaster really efficient to use in a session, especially if inspiration strikes at like 3 in the morning and I really just want to sketch out a track. In terms of the actual synthesis engine, one of the coolest things about SynthMaster One is that it offers standard subtractive synthesis, but you can also do amplitude modulation, ring modulation, frequency modulation, and phase modulation using the sub-oscillator by changing the mode. So this makes SynthMaster One an absolute powerhouse for sound design purposes. On top of that, SynthMaster One also offers a wavetable oscillator, so you can see the waveform in a full 3D view right here and use wavetables if you'd like to do that instead for building your sounds. So to break down SynthMaster One, we'll go ahead and look through the UI here. So we start off with 2 oscillators. Each oscillator has a sub-oscillator, and then those sub-oscillators have different modes. So we can leave it as a standard sub-oscillator, or change it to amplitude, ring, phase, or frequency modulation. Within each oscillator, you can change the octave or the semitone. You can use unison, and you get up to 16 voices per oscillator. You can change the stereo width, which I'm a really big fan of. That allows you to create nice, flexible, wide pads, and you can also control the stereo width with modulation, which is excellent. You can control the amount of detuning, and you can set it to free running or synced phase. One of the other cool things in the subtractive engine is actually the waveform algorithm. So over here, you can actually change this to different phase distortion modes or filtering modes. There's low pass, high pass, all the standard modes. You get bend modes, sync modes, and then other over here. So you can use pulse width modulation, or bit crushing. So you can take any standard waveform and shape it in a lot of different ways, which is incredibly powerful. On top of that, as with most things within SynthMaster One, you can also modulate these parameters, which allows you to open up a whole new world of interesting textural sound design. One of the more interesting parts of the unison features is actually the detune curve here, so you can actually use this to control the way the voices are detuned, and this is really, really fun to mess with, especially for making big, wide supersaw sounds. Below the oscillators, we have 2 different filters here. These are zero delay feedback filters, which is excellent, and you can change the filter routing. So you can see up here in this section, we have filters in series, split, or in parallel. Both of these filters offer a ton of different modes, so you can change these to be whatever you would like, and that again opens up a whole mess of sound design options. And then once you get into the different filter routing options, you can really create some unique things using SynthMaster. Within each filter, we get a couple more options. There's the standard LFO and modulation envelope. You can switch these between 1 and 2 with these buttons here. You have key tracking, and you have the acid and boost switches, which can change the resonance and tonality of a filter type. Above that, there's the filter input gain, filter drive, the cutoff, resonance, and volume. So you get quite a few options with these filters, and they can be any mode you would like, so you can have 2 different filters and route them in different ways, which can create a lot of really interesting modulated textures and movements to different sounds. In the center here, we have the effects section. There are 11 effects in total, and if you'd like to change them, you can simply right-click and change between the different effects. So we have distortion, lo-fi, which is a bit crusher, ensemble, phaser, equalizer, vocoder, delay, chorus, tremolo, reverb, and the compressor. One of my favorite effects in SynthMaster One personally is the reverb. I'm not sure what it is about it, but this is easily one of the best sounding reverbs I've heard inside of a synth. So definitely be sure to mess with that. I think this sounds really, really nice on plucks and pads in particular. Down here in this section, we have our modulations and envelopes. So we have 2 different LFOs. These LFOs have a bunch of controls. You can control the rate, you can set them to poly, global, mono, or random. We have options for the beat multiplier, different waveforms, and you can actually use a bunch of interesting waveforms, which is really cool. An option to toggle if it's bipolar or not, the volume or amplitude of the LFO, a sync option, speed, noise, sample and hold, phase, and attack. So these are extremely powerful LFOs overall, and having 2 of these is absolutely ridiculous. In the center of this area here, we have our envelopes. So we have 2 modulation envelopes and 2 amplitude envelopes. So we have 4 of these in total, and you can adjust the curves between linear and exponential, which is really handy for sound design when it comes to things like drums or plucks or anything involving some transient work. Down here at the bottom, we have the pitch wheel and mod wheel controls. We have a keyboard that you can use down here to play different notes, if you'd like to quickly preview a sound or don't have a MIDI controller handy. Over here, we have the glide, the type of glide, the vibrato controls, attack and speed, and the velocity curve adjustment right here. Over to the left is where we get into all of the options. So we have an arpeggiator here. You can have up to 16 steps. The arpeggiator can also act as a sequencer, so this is a really interesting way to create complex sequences without having to do a whole bunch of work within your DAW. There are 2 mod matrix sections down here, so you can add an absolutely insane amount of modulation to different patches, which is why I really like SynthMaster One for pads, because I can assign a lot of things to do different things, and it allows you to create a bunch of movement really easily. Then we have the attribute section, so if you create your own presets, you can write all of the details here, which is really handy. And finally, we have the settings section. One of the more interesting things in the settings section I think is worth pointing out is that you can actually load different tunings from a Scala file, so this can actually create some more analog feeling synth patches, which is really cool. Further to that point, over on the right-hand side, we have separate controls for oscillator 1 and 2 for pitch drifting amount and pitch drifting speed, which I think is really cool and allows you to create these really alive, lush, organic synth patches. And one last thing to point out, down here in the bottom left, you have the engine quality settings, which is important to keep an eye on for some of the more intensive patches. So I think that's enough talking, and let's take a listen to some sound. So we're going to be checking out some of my presets that are included with the new update. So for this bank, I made a whole bunch of different 808 sounds, ranging from really crunchy, distorted ones to really soft and heavy ones. A bunch of modulated bass lines, and just kind of classic dark Reese sounds, more aggressive modulated ones. And some of the more interesting ones that involve the mod wheel to create different movements and textures to things. So like I said, one of my favorite things about SynthMaster is creating pads with it. So I've created 10 different pads for this preset bank, and these are all really interesting modulated things, which I'm a big fan of. Take a listen to another pad here. On top of that, I've added in a couple different hats and other sounds. Some kick drums. A couple snares as well. Electric pianos. And a bunch of modern EDM-focused leads. Then I've added in some modulated bass lines. And a couple wavetable basses as well. So when it comes to using SynthMaster One in the context of a track, I've created a little loop here and just used a bunch of my presets that are included with the new update, and then I created one new snare layer. This was just using a sine wave and noise and then some split filters, and that created this. So that is why I really like SynthMaster One. I love how rich and full this synth sounds. So I used one of my sub presets here for this sub bass. For the actual Reese modulated patch, I used the bass 4 here, which has quite a bit of movement. For this kind of hollow pluck sound, this is the lead 2 patch. And then for this brass, this is lead 10, which kind of acts as a saw patch, but it can also act as more of a brassy tone in the lower octaves. But it has this really sharp attack, so it cuts through pretty well. And that is all I used to create this little loop here, which is pretty cool. It's not much, but it really has this big full sound to it. So when it comes to creating your own presets and sounds, I wanted to show you a couple tips and interesting things to keep in mind. So I think we'll go ahead and start things off here with a triangle wave, which isn't going to sound like much. But we can start shaping this using the waveform algorithm. So we're going to go ahead and open up bend plus and minus, and we can use this phase control to adjust the phase distortion. Okay. And then what we can do is drag the LFO onto the phase. We'll go to the mod matrix and just adjust the amount here. We'll make this bipolar. And we want to make this nice and slow to create some movement to this triangle. There we go. All right, let's go ahead and add just 2 voices of unison and detune these a little bit. And we'll set this to free running. So already we can change this into a whole multitude of sounds. We could drop this down to a lower octave and add some distortion to make a nice aggressive bass. But I think we're going to turn this into more of a pluck to utilize these effects. So I'm going to go ahead and shift this up 1 octave. We'll go and detune this a little bit more, add a touch of stereo width. So to add a bit more character to this sound, we're going to change the sub oscillator here. We're going to set this to sub mode, and we're going to bring this up 7 semitones, and then we're going to introduce this with an envelope. And that's going to just add a bit more character to the sound over time. So we'll go ahead and tie mod envelope 1 to the volume by just dragging that up here. Now we just need to adjust this envelope to add a bit of attack time, so it opens up over time, maybe over about half a second. Maybe a bit longer than that. We can go to our mod matrix to adjust the amount of the envelope. And there we go. So from here, I want to adjust the amplitude envelope. I just want to make this into more of a plucky sound. So we're going to just drop the sustain and up the decay. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. From here, let's go ahead and drop this distortion down. I just want to create a little bit of saturation. And using the pre-EQ, I'm going to go ahead and boost the bass frequencies a little bit, about 8 dB, and we want to try and find a nice resonant frequency here in the low end. So right at about 500 to 700 hertz there. It creates a nice little bit of bark to that sound. So now we're going to tie mod envelope 2 to the pitch, and that's going to create a nice transient. So I'm going to go ahead and right click here, and we're going to go to envelopes, mod envelope 2, and we're going to tie this to oscillator 1 pitch. Now we can just drop the sustain and release, up the decay just a little bit, maybe over about 80 milliseconds or so. And now we're just going to adjust the amount. There we go. Now we've got a nice transient to this with that pitch decay. So now I want to add some higher frequency content to this sound. So I'm going to open up oscillator 2 here by clicking here. And then we're going to go to wavetables, and we're going to go to digital, and we'll find Bellish wavetable 4. Now I'm just going to scan through this wavetable with the index here. That seems like a nice starting point. So now we can go ahead and tie mod envelope 2 to that as well. And now we're well on our way to a nice, interesting sound. So now I want to add just a little bit of movement to this over time. So I'm going to tie LFO2 to the overall pitch. So to do that, I'm going to right click and assign LFO2, and we'll right click oscillator 1 pitch and right click oscillator 2 pitch. Now we can just vary this a little bit. So about that much and about that much. So I'm just adding a bit of movement over time to the pitch, and I just want to make this really, really slow. We'll set this to bipolar and drop the volume, which is going to affect the amplitude of the LFO. So now over time, this will kind of add a bit of tape warble. And it's very, very subtle, but over the course of a longer pattern, it'll be more apparent. So from here, we could add a filter. I'm going to drop the input gain and we can just adjust the cutoff here. Let's make this into a 24 decibel per octave filter. We'll add a little bit of resonance and move this just till we find a nice point. Right about there seems good. And we'll just tie mod envelope 2 to that cutoff as well. So now we're getting a good deal of movement and modulation, so we can start adding some effects. So from here, I'm going to add the lo-fi. We'll turn that on, and then we're just going to adjust the sample and hold frequency. And drop the bits. There we go. And then we're going to go ahead and add an EQ, and just to cut out some of that low end stuff we really don't need. So we'll go ahead and enable this, enable the high pass, and move it up, probably to about 200 hertz or so. From here, we could add a nice treble lift, because we kind of want to bring out that crunchy lo-fi. So we're just going to kind of tune this for just a minute. Drop that blend back down, and there we go. So from here, we'll add a nice chorusing effect. And we'll just drop the mod amount slightly and the speed. We can add a nice ping pong delay. We'll mix that in fairly low. And then from here, we could adjust the delay filter, which is really nice. So we'll go ahead and just make this more of a mid-range type of delay. And then we'll change the timing. Do quarter note dotted, and then a half note dotted here. And then we'll add a reverb. So we've got this so far. And then we're going to add a big old reverb. And like I said, this is probably one of my favorite synth reverbs. So I'm going to bring up the size and density. We'll drop the damping. Distance just a little bit. A little more mod amount. And then we're going to increase this time to a pretty high value of about 8 seconds or so. Mix this in a bit lower, and then I think we'll adjust that delay. So we'll go ahead and set this to maybe a dotted eighth note and a dotted quarter, and that should be fine. And now we get a really interesting modern pluck sound. So by adjusting things like the envelope and the effects slightly here, I've just increased the attack and added some sustain and changed the filter cutoff, we could turn this into like a nice, dark, modern trap type of pad. Or we could change the other attributes like the time here and just increase the size quite a bit, and we can get a nice kind of plucky, interesting, almost cartoonish sound. And so that's pretty much it. That is SynthMaster One in a nutshell. As you can tell, this is an incredibly powerful synth and a great tool for any producer. And that's it for this video, so thanks for watching, and if you want to check out SynthMaster for yourself, you can find it today at kv331audio.com.